For more than 4 decades, one question has followed Christopher Walken everywhere. What really happened on Natalie Wood's boat that night? Walken was there. He heard the argument, and he was one of the last people aboard the Splendor before Natalie vanished into the dark waters off Catalina Island. Years later, he finally gave his own explanation of what he believed happened. But one crucial detail makes this mystery far more unsettling. Because according to Walken himself, when Natalie disappeared, he was already in bed. On November 28, 1981, there was little reason to imagine that the weekend would become one of Hollywood's most debated tragedies. Natalie Wood was 43 years old, already a 3-time Academy Award nominee and one of the most recognizable actresses of her generation. She had grown from the child star of Miracle on 34th Street into the woman audiences remembered from Rebel Without a Cause, West Side Story, and Splendor in the Grass. That Thanksgiving weekend, Natalie was aboard the approximately 60-foot yacht Splendor near Catalina Island with her husband, actor Robert Wagner. Also, there was the boat's captain, Dennis Davern. And then there was Christopher Walken. Walken, 38 at the time, was Natalie's co-star in Brainstorm, the science fiction film they had been making under director Douglas Trumbull. He was not simply some mysterious stranger who appeared on the yacht that weekend. According to accounts surrounding Natalie Wood, what remains behind, Natalie had invited him during the production's Thanksgiving break. On Saturday evening, Natalie, Wagner, and Walken went ashore for drinks and dinner at Doug's Harbor Reef restaurant. Afterward, they returned to the Splendor. More drinks followed. Then the mood changed. Years later, Wagner himself acknowledged that he and Walken became involved in a heated argument. At the center of it was Natalie's career. Wagner recalled Walken saying, "I think it's important she works." Wagner's response was unmistakably defensive. "I think it's important you keep out of her life." Dennis Davern would later remember the confrontation differently and much more aggressively, but both versions point to the same uncomfortable fact. There was tension aboard the yacht before Natalie disappeared. Wagner has also acknowledged smashing a wine bottle during the argument. At some point, Natalie left the men, and according to the accounts later given about that night, Christopher Walken eventually went to bed. That detail matters, because when Natalie Wood disappeared from the Splendor, Walken would repeatedly insist that he did not see what happened next. By morning, the glamorous Hollywood weekend was over. Natalie Wood was dead. By the time the men realized something was wrong, Natalie Wood was no longer aboard the Splendor. Even more alarming, the yacht's small dinghy was gone as well. That combination initially suggested a possibility that did not necessarily involve disaster. Natalie might have taken the dinghy ashore. According to Christopher Walken's account to investigators, rough conditions had already made life aboard the yacht uncomfortable, and Natalie had gone ashore the previous night. He said this helped explain why her absence did not immediately convince him that she was in the water. Walken's police account, later reported by the National Enquirer, provides a revealing picture of what he claimed happened from his perspective. After the tense discussion aboard the yacht, Walken said that the atmosphere eventually cooled, and everybody was apologizing. Natalie retired to her cabin. When she and the dinghy were later discovered missing, Walken believed she could have gone back to shore. With that assumption in mind, he returned to his stateroom and went to sleep. This account is important, although the details attributed to the police report have been published through a tabloid source and should not be treated as independently verified evidence. When Walken woke the next morning, the situation had completely changed. Authorities had been contacted and a search was underway. According to the same account, Robert Wagner was deeply worried and told Walken that Natalie may have drowned. Walken then listened to radio communications as the search continued. Eventually, he heard that a body had been found. He later told investigators that he was afraid to be the person who delivered that news to Wagner. Then came the moment Walken remembered with remarkable simplicity. Roughly 10 minutes later, a boat approached the Splendor. According to his recollection, someone aboard spoke directly to Wagner and said, "It's not good." Natalie's body had been recovered from the waters off Catalina Island on November 29, 1981. She was only 43. What had begun as a Thanksgiving weekend involving 3 major Hollywood actors had ended with one of them dead and the other 2 facing questions that would follow them for decades. At the time, authorities classified Natalie's death as an accidental drowning, but that ruling did not answer the question that fascinated the public. How had she ended up in the water? Walken could not answer it from direct observation. That became the central point of his public account. When Brainstorm, Natalie's final film, was finally released in 1983, Walken spoke to Entertainment Tonight and drew a firm line between what he considered established and what remained unknowable. "The real story of her death is that she drowned," he said, "and nobody knows how she drowned or what happened, except her." For Walken, that distinction would define almost everything he said publicly about Natalie Wood for the next 4 decades. As the years passed, Christopher Walken became increasingly unwilling to discuss Natalie Wood publicly. Yet the few times he did speak are important because they reveal something more specific than simple silence. Walken gradually explained how he believed the accident could have happened, while never claiming that he had actually witnessed it. In a 1986 profile published by People 5 years after Natalie's death, Walken was asked about the subject again. His response was unusually sharp. "I don't know what happened," he said. "She slipped and fell in the water. I was in bed then. It was a terrible thing." When the conversation continued, Walken shut it down, telling the interviewer, "We're in a conversation I won't have." By then, the tragedy had followed him through years of interviews, and he clearly had little interest in feeding the endless speculation surrounding the case. But in 1997, Walken gave Playboy a much more detailed explanation. This time, he described the physical conditions aboard the yacht and offered his own theory about what Natalie might have done after leaving the others. He remembered the weather, the layout of the boat, and most importantly, the dinghy that had been tied alongside the Splendor. According to Walken, it had been bouncing against the side of the boat. He believed Natalie may have gone outside to move it. Walken also described a ski ramp that was partially submerged. He said the surface was slippery and emphasized that he knew this from experience because he had walked on it himself. His theory was straightforward. Natalie could have stepped outside alone, attempted to deal with the dinghy, slipped and fallen into the water. There was another detail that made that scenario particularly frightening. Walken said Natalie had told him she could not swim. He even claimed that a swimming scene in Brainstorm had to be removed because of it, although that production detail requires independent confirmation. He also speculated that she might have been half asleep when she went outside. In another passage from that interview, Walken put his belief even more plainly. "Nobody can know, but I believe she went to move that dinghy, slipped, fell, hit her head, and died." Those first 3 words are essential. Nobody can know. Walken was not describing something he saw. He was reconstructing what he believed could have happened from the conditions aboard the boat. To him, Natalie's death was a terrible accident rather than evidence of something more sinister. He told Playboy that what happened that night only she knows, because she was alone. For years, that was essentially Walken's answer to Hollywood's mystery. He could explain what he thought happened on the Splendor. What he could never provide was the one thing the public wanted most: an eyewitness account of Natalie Wood entering the water. For nearly 30 years, the official finding of an accidental drowning remained in place, but the story changed dramatically in November 2011 when the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department reopened the investigation into Natalie Wood's death. The renewed attention followed years of conflicting accounts and new statements surrounding the night aboard the Splendor, including claims from the yacht's captain, Dennis Davern. Davern had also participated in the book Goodbye, Natalie, Goodbye, Splendor, which presented allegations that sharply challenged the original version of events. Davern's later account placed far greater emphasis on the conflict between Robert Wagner and Natalie. His recollections also differed from Wagner's description of the argument involving Walken. Wagner remembered confronting Walken over his comments about Natalie returning more fully to acting, while Davern described Wagner's reaction as far more jealous and aggressive. Those differences became important because investigators were no longer dealing simply with the physical question of how Natalie entered the water. They also had to evaluate memories that had evolved over 3 decades. Walken was drawn back into the investigation, but his legal position was significantly different from the cloud of public suspicion surrounding Wagner. Investigators spoke with Walken, and reporting connected to the reopened case emphasized that he was not considered a person of interest. When a TMZ photographer approached him in 2011 and asked about the renewed investigation, Walken offered almost nothing publicly, replying simply, "I don't know." The medical record also underwent a significant revision. Natalie's death had originally been classified as an accidental drowning, but in 2012, the Los Angeles County coroner amended the death certificate. The manner of death was changed from accident to undetermined, while the cause was described as drowning and other undetermined factors. That distinction mattered enormously. It did not establish homicide, nor did it prove that another person caused Natalie's death. It meant that authorities could no longer determine with certainty exactly how she entered the water. By February 2018, investigators publicly identified Wagner as a person of interest. Authorities said they believed he was the last person known to have been with Natalie before she disappeared. Wagner denied wrongdoing, and no criminal charges were filed against him. Walken, meanwhile, remained outside that designation. CBS's Erin Moriarty later reported another intriguing detail. Investigators believed Walken's story had changed a little bit between what he initially told police and what he later said publicly, including in Playboy. Yet investigators still did not classify him as a person of interest. That distinction is crucial. Differences in recollection are not evidence of guilt, especially across interviews separated by many years. But they explain why investigators continued examining the accounts of everyone aboard the yacht. By then, Walken had essentially stopped trying to convince the public. When Gayle King asked him about Natalie on CBS This Morning in 2012, he said he had stopped discussing the subject 30 years earlier. There were books, interviews, and endless material available, he said. Anyone who wanted to know more could go look. The mystery returned to mainstream attention in 2020 with HBO's documentary Natalie Wood, What Remains Behind. This time, the story was approached through Natalie's family, particularly her daughter Natasha Gregson Wagner, who sat down with Robert Wagner and asked him directly about the night her mother died. Christopher Walken did not participate, leaving Wagner to describe the confrontation that had unfolded before Natalie disappeared. Speaking to his stepdaughter, Wagner acknowledged the argument with Walken and described the subject as Natalie's career. He recalled Walken arguing that it was important for Natalie to work, while Wagner felt that his guest was interfering in something deeply personal. Wagner also admitted that he smashed a wine bottle during the confrontation. In the documentary, however, he maintained that he did not know how Natalie ultimately entered the water. "Nobody heard anything," he told Natasha. Visibly emotional, he added that the night had gone through his mind so many times. The documentary demonstrated why the case has remained so difficult to separate from Hollywood mythology. The 3 stars aboard the yacht occupied very different positions afterward. Natalie could never explain what happened. Wagner spent decades defending himself against suspicion and denying wrongdoing. Walken, meanwhile, became the unusual third figure, a man who was present for the tension before Natalie vanished, but consistently maintained that he was absent for the decisive moment. That is also why saying Christopher Walken confirmed what happened requires an important distinction. He never confirmed witnessing Natalie fall from the Splendor. He never claimed to have watched her approach the dinghy, and he never said he saw another person put her in the water. What he did eventually make clear was his own reconstruction of the circumstances. Based on the weather, the slippery surfaces, the dinghy, and what he knew about Natalie, Walken believed she went outside alone and suffered an accident. His certainty about that interpretation was strongest in the 1997 Playboy interview. After describing how ordinary accidents can suddenly become fatal, Walken rejected the idea that some hidden explanation necessarily remained. He said people convinced there was more to the case would never be satisfied with the truth because, in his view, there is nothing more to it. But the official record ultimately became less certain than Walken was. After the investigation was reopened, Natalie's manner of death was changed from accident to undetermined. No criminal charge established that Wagner, Walken, Davern, or anyone else killed Natalie Wood. Walken was not designated a person of interest in the reopened investigation. His explanation, therefore, remains exactly what it always was. The theory of a man who had been aboard the yacht, knew the conditions that night, witnessed some of the events leading up to Natalie's disappearance, but said he did not witness her final moments. More than 4 decades after November 29, 1981, that distinction may be the most important fact in the entire story. Christopher Walken has told us what he believes happened on Natalie Wood's boat. What he cannot confirm is the one moment that would finally solve the mystery, because by his own account, he simply wasn't there to see it. More than 4 decades later, Natalie Wood's final moments remain unresolved. Christopher Walken has explained what he believes happened. Investigators reopened the case, and the official manner of death was changed to undetermined, yet no one has proved exactly how Natalie entered the water that night. Do you believe Walken's accident theory, or do you think something important is still missing from the story? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories behind Hollywood's most unforgettable legends.